The morning does not begin with a sound. It begins with its absence. Sansa Stark lies still in the darkness of her tower chamber, eyes open, listening to the silence where birdsong should be. Dawn is close. She can feel it in the particular quality of the black beyond her window, the way night thins at its edges before it surrenders. She has not slept. She is not sure she has slept at all since the day her father was taken to the black cells, since the world she understood folded in on itself and became something unrecognizable, something with teeth. She hears them before she sees anything. Two voices, low and careful, threading through the gap beneath her door like smoke finding a crack. One voice she does not know. A servant's voice, soft and vowel-flattened in the manner of someone from the free cities. The other voice she recognizes immediately, and the recognition moves through her like cold water poured slowly down her spine. Varys, the spider, the man who moves through the Red Keep like a rumor, appearing where he should not, knowing what cannot be known. She does not move. She controls her breathing with the concentration of someone older than she is, drawing each breath shallow and silent, willing her body into the stillness of furniture, of walls. And she listens. The servant speaks first, quick and barely audible, and Sansa catches fragments only. The word decided, the phrase before the sept, something that might be regardless. Then Varys answers, and his voice is the softer of the two, and yet carries further, carries the weight of certainty behind its careful gentleness. He says that the Queen's mercy is a performance, nothing more. He says that the Lord of Winterfell will confess, and confessing will not save him, because his fate was settled before he was ever brought to kneel. He says the confession is for the crowd, not for Ned Stark. Sansa closes her eyes. Something inside her, the last remaining piece of the girl who wrote letters home about tourneys and knights and the beautiful cruelty of courtly life, goes very quiet. It does not break. It simply stops. She understands now what she has been refusing to understand for weeks. The Red Keep is not a court of laws and careful judgment. It is a theater, and her father has already been written out of the play. She rises before the voices have finished. She moves to the far corner of her chamber, to the chest beside the window that she has not opened in 3 days, not since Varys left it unlocked in the night, and she found what was folded inside. Rough cloth, the color of mud and river water. A servant girl's dress, plain hemmed, smelling faintly of tallow and kitchen smoke. She has touched it twice since then in the dark, reassuring herself it is still there, still real. She touches it now with the same careful reverence one might bring to something sacred. She dresses quickly, efficiently, without a candle. Her fingers know the laces by feel. She braids her hair tight and plain against her skull. No decoration, nothing that catches the eye. She is Sansa Stark, true-born daughter of the Warden of the North, and she will spend whatever remains of her life being someone else entirely. She tucks her mother's silver brooch deep inside the small satchel she has prepared. Coin purse, the brooch, nothing else, nothing that slows her. And she does not let herself look at the brooch longer than a moment. She cannot afford the feeling it produces. The door to her chamber opens from the outside. She had not heard the lock turn, and the shock of it stops her breath entirely. But it is Varys who enters, and he is already in motion, already gesturing toward the back of the room, toward the heavy tapestry that depicts a hunting scene she has stared at for months without truly seeing. She had looked at those woven hounds 1,000 times. She had never considered what might lie behind them, He moves the tapestry aside with the practiced ease of someone for whom secret passages are simply hallways. Behind it, the wall opens into stone-smelling darkness, a narrow throat of corridor barely wide enough for one person, and Varys steps inside and beckons without a word. His powder-pale face is unreadable, composed, radiating the absolute calm of a man who has calculated every contingency and found them all manageable. They move through the beneath places of the Red Keep for a long time. The passage slopes downward and then levels, turns twice in darkness, passes through a low archway where Sansa must duck her head, and continues. The air tastes of old water and stone, and the particular mineral silence of depth. Varys does not speak. His slippered feet make almost no sound. She follows the pale shape of him through the dark and tries not to think about where she is, what is above her, how many feet of Lannister stone press down from overhead. When they emerge at last, the air changes first. It becomes cool and river-scented, open-feeling. And then she sees a sliver of pre-dawn sky between two close-leaning buildings, the dark gray of it touched faintly at its lowest edge with the suggestion of light not yet arrived. He stops. He turns to her, and his voice, when it comes, is barely breath. A boat waits at the docks, he tells her. She will ask for passage under the name Mira of Salt Pans. She will not look back at the city? Not once. She opens her mouth to ask him why he is doing this, what it costs him, what move and what game she represents. And he is already gone, already swallowed back into the passage, already nowhere. The street of steel begins 20 yards ahead of her. The city is just beginning to stir, the first gray shapes of early workers moving at its far edges. And somewhere below, unseen, the river breathes. She moves before she thinks. That is the only way forward now. Movement preceding thought, feet deciding what the mind cannot yet process. The street of steel is quiet at this hour, its forge fires banked and cold. The iron smell of it hanging in the still air like something left behind by harder men than those now sleeping above its shuttered windows. She keeps to the left side of the street, close to the buildings, where the shadow is thickest, and the cobblestones are worn smooth by years of traffic, easier under her feet than the raised center channel that carries the rain down toward the bay. She is a merchant's daughter. She says it once, beneath her breath, not a prayer, but a rehearsal. She is Mira of Salt Pans, and she has done nothing unusual, and she is not afraid. The docks announce themselves before they are visible. The smell arrives first, brine and old rope, and the particular heaviness of water that has carried cargo for centuries, salt layered over rot, layered over commerce. Then the sound, the low, intimate percussion of hulls nudging against pilings, the creak of rigging strung taut by the morning wind beginning to move off the bay. She comes down a narrow lane between two warehouses, and then the harbor opens before her, black and immense, the water so dark it seems less like water than like an absence of everything, a gap cut out of the world and filled with nothing at all. She counts the vessels the way she was taught to count anything in court, methodically, without expression, scanning left to right as though she has every right to be standing here calculating. Most of the ships are large, their silhouettes heavy and unfamiliar, but closer to the far end of the dock, set apart from the greater vessels, the way a practical thing sets itself apart from impressive things. A modest cog rides low in the water, single-masted, broad-bottomed, the kind of ship that moves grain and dried fish and bolts of undyed wool, the kind of ship that no one remembers seeing after it has passed. The name along its prow is barely legible in the pre-dawn gray. Saltwind. She exhales. She had not known until this moment that she had been holding that breath all the way from the tunnel's mouth. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now, let's continue with the story. She is 10 yards from the gangplank when the guardsman steps out from between two stacked rows of crates. He is Lannister, the crimson of his cloak gone dark and brownish in the low light. But the lion at his chest catches what little brightness exists and throws it back. He is not old, not young. He has the look of a man doing his job without particular enthusiasm, which makes him more dangerous than a zealot and less dangerous than a man with something to prove. His eyes move over her with professional suspicion, the way all guards in this city have learned to look at people who appear where people should not yet appear. He does not reach for his sword. He does not need to. His presence is sufficient. She speaks before he does. This is the first calculation, and it is the correct one. To let him ask is to let him frame the encounter, and she will not surrender that ground. She tells him her father sent her ahead with a ledger for the Saltwind's captain, trade accounts that need settling before the morning tide. Her voice does not waver. Her voice has been trained since childhood never to waver. Trained in the same years, she was trained to sit straight and smile through boredom and find the precise words that make powerful people feel as though they have already decided what you are about to suggest. She looks him in the eyes steadily, because looking away is an answer she cannot afford to give. He considers her. He looks at her hands. She has thought of this, has tucked the small bundle she carries under her arm in a way that resembles, if one does not examine it too closely, a ledger or a folded document. A beat passes, and then another. Somewhere out on the water, something knocks against wood. He tells her to be quick about it. The docks are no place for merchants' daughters at this hour. He steps aside. She nods once with the practiced gratitude of someone who expected no less, and she walks forward without hurrying, because hurrying is its own kind of answer. The woman on the Saltwind's deck is perhaps 50, her face the particular texture of someone who has spent 30 years being solved by weather. Her hair is iron gray and pulled back with the efficiency of someone who settled long ago the question of how she appears to others. She looks at Sansa for a moment with eyes that are calm and evaluative in equal measure, and when Sansa says the name Mira of Saltpans, the woman called Calla simply nods as though a fact she already knew has merely been confirmed, and tells her to go below and stay there until they are past the chain. The Saltwind pushes away from the dock without ceremony. No shouts, no great heaving of lines, simply a quiet severance, the dark water accepting the hull and carrying it forward into the bay, as though this were the most natural departure in the world. Sansa does not go below, not yet. She stands at the stern and watches the hill rise behind the retreating city, and at its peak, above the rooftops and the pre-dawn mist, the Red Keep burns with torchlight along its walls and towers. Her father is up there somewhere in that stone. She does not know. She cannot know that those torches will still be burning 2 dawns from now when everything changes. When the world as she has understood it ceases to exist between one moment and the next. She looks at the lights a long time. Then she turns around. She faces the open water. The wind off the bay is cold and tastes of distances she has never traveled, and beneath her feet, the salt wind moves with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a thing that has made this crossing before and will make it again, indifferent to everything it carries. It is only when she turns that she notices the other passenger. A figure seated very still near the bow, hooded despite the absence of rain, watching the water with the particular patience of someone who is very good at waiting. The fishing vessel appears on the second morning, a low-slung weathered thing with patched sails and the smell of brine and old nets carried ahead of it on the wind. It cuts across the salt wind's path at an angle that is not quite accidental, and Captain Calla reads this signal the way she reads all signals, with her hands loose at her sides and her eyes doing the calculation before her expression commits to anything. The exchange takes perhaps 10 minutes. The fishermen call across the water and Calla's first mate calls back. And somewhere in that brief commerce of words, the shape of the world changes irrevocably, though Sansa, standing at the rail, does not yet know it. She knows it when she sees Calla's face. A captain learns to carry news like cargo, secured, balanced, handled carefully, so it does not shift and capsize the whole vessel. Calla walks toward her with that careful walk, and the news is already visible in the set of her jaw before a single word is spoken. She does not cushion it. A cushion, she seems to understand, would be an insult to this particular girl, who has already survived things that should not have been survivable. She says it plainly. Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King, executed in the plaza before the great sept of Baelor. Joffrey's order, the sword already fallen. The silence that follows is total. Sansa does not cry. Not then. Not on the deck with Calla watching her with that careful, steady attention. Something she might have expected to shatter simply does not shatter. She feels instead a sensation she has no precise name for, a settling perhaps, or a sealing, as though some part of her that had been left open against all better judgment has finally, permanently closed. She nods once. She says she would like some time alone. Her voice does not break. This surprises her more than the news itself. The cargo hold is dim and smells of salt-preserved wood and the ghost of whatever goods the salt wind carried on previous voyages. She sits on a wrapped bundle of something that gives slightly under her weight, and she is alone, and only then does the grief come. But even this grief is not what she would have anticipated in her most honest, private moments. It does not unmake her. It does not flood through her like the songs describe, all-consuming and obliterating. It is quieter than that. It is the grief of someone who has already, in the part of herself she rarely visited, been preparing for it. Her father had been a piece on the board. So had she. She had simply not understood the board. She understands it now. She understands that understanding it is the only thing she has left. She thinks of his face. She allows herself that much. The particular gravity of it. The way he listened when she spoke, as though her words merited the same weight as anyone's. The way he carried the North with him, even in King's Landing. In his bearing, in his discomfort with the South's ease and warmth and carelessness. She holds his face in her mind for a long time in the dark of the hold. Then she sets it down somewhere deep and still inside herself. Somewhere it will be safe. Somewhere it will not be used against her. She learns this instinctively. She does not know she is learning it, but it will not leave her. When she comes back up to the deck, the light has shifted toward afternoon. The sea moves in long, slow swells. The hooded figure at the bow has not moved. Calla is at the helm and does not press her, does not perform sympathy. which Sansa finds she is grateful for in a way she could not have articulated 2 days ago and now understands completely. Calla brings her the choice that evening, presenting it the way a strategist lays pieces on a table. Without preference, without emphasis, letting the logic of each option speak for itself. The salt wind can adjust course and put her ashore near the twins, where the Freys hold their bridge and where an alliance with House Stark's eldest son might translate to shelter and safety. Though the Freys are their own calculation, their own variables, and safety is perhaps not the word for anything the Freys offer. Or she can continue north to White Harbor, to Lord Manderley, who is a Stark bannerman and whose loyalty has not been tested by catastrophe quite yet, and who might be the first brick in whatever wall she needs to build. Or Calla can turn the salt wind east, past the shipping lanes, past the familiar coastlines, east and further east, until Braavos rises from its lagoon and its 100 islands, and with it a world entirely beyond the reach of Lannister letters and Lannister gold and Lannister swords. 3 doors. Only one can be opened. Sansa stands at the rail again, and the light is going out of the sky in the west behind them, and ahead of them the sea is the color of iron. And she is 14 years old and the daughter of a dead man, and she is thinking the way she has never thought before, not with her heart, not with her hopes, but with something colder and more durable and newly awake inside her. She becomes aware that the hooded passenger has moved. He is standing not far behind her now, and he says, very quietly, that she should choose Braavos. He does not say why. He does not say who he is. She does not choose Braavos. The hooded man's words hang in the salt air between them, and Sansa turns to look at him fully for the first time. And what she sees is a face that gives nothing. A face arranged deliberately and with great skill to give nothing. She files this away. She does not ask his name again. She does not ask why Braavos, because she already understands that the answer he would give her would be the answer he has chosen to give her, and not necessarily the true one. She is learning already the difference between those two things. She turns back to the iron-colored sea, and she says nothing, and after a long moment, the hooded man withdraws, and the sound of his footsteps fades back along the deck, and Sansa is alone again with the wind and the weight of everything. She thinks about Braavos. She thinks about it seriously, the way one considers a door before deciding not to open it. Braavos is safety of a kind, distance, anonymity, a city so vast and so full of foreigners that one more fair-haired girl would dissolve into it like salt into water. But Braavos is exile. Braavos is surrender dressed in the clothing of survival. Braavos means that Robb fights without her, that Arya is lost without her, that the Stark name becomes something spoken only in elegy. Sansa is her father's daughter, and her father's blood ran northward always, ran toward duty and stone, and the cold that keeps a person honest. She was never meant for the warmth of the South, and she is certainly not meant for the warmth of a foreign city's mercy. White Harbor, then. She turns the reasoning over and examines it from every face. Lord Wyman Manderley, fat, laughing, politically astute in the way only men who have survived the reigns of multiple kings can be, has served House Stark faithfully across decades without crisis to test that faithfulness. This is the thing about loyalty untested. It could be nothing, mere habit and convenience, the easy obedience of a man who has never been asked to pay a real price. Or it could be the deepest kind, the kind that has been quietly accumulating interest for years, waiting for the moment it is called upon. Sansa does not know which it is, But she knows that House Manderley is the wealthiest lordship in the north, that White Harbor is a functioning port city with walls and soldiers and grain stores, and that Lord Wyman is shrewd enough to know that a living Stark daughter is worth more to him politically than any letter arriving on a Lannister raven. She is an asset to him. She intends to be. She finds Calla before the last light is gone and says the words plainly, "White Harbor." Calla does not look surprised. She looks, if anything, like a woman who has already made the calculation herself. The salt wind makes port in the gray morning 3 days later beneath a merchant's flag, blue and unremarkable, belonging to a trading house out of Goldtown, whose captain's papers are apparently the sort that discourage close inspection. The harbor at White Harbor is loud with commerce even in the early hours. Cranes and ropes and the smell of fish and pine tar. Men shouting in the particular shorthand of dock workers everywhere. Gulls cutting arcs through the low cloud. Nobody looks twice at a slim girl in rough servant's clothes descending a gangplank among the crew. Nobody looks twice because Sansa has thought carefully about this, has rubbed her hands with rope grime and tucked her copper hair beneath a coarse linen hood, has made herself small in her posture and deliberately clumsy in her walk. Her mother once told her that the best disguise for a highborn girl was exhaustion, because exhaustion makes a person look like they belong to their work. She was not wrong. The message is the harder problem. Sansa cannot walk to the Manderley Keep and announce herself at the gate. She cannot trust a stranger. She thinks about this with the cold, careful part of herself that has been growing stronger for weeks now, and eventually she does the only thing she can do. She finds a middleman within the ship's own company, a woman who carries trading communications up to the keep as a matter of ordinary business, and she gives the woman a sealed letter. The seal is plain wax. She has no sigil to press into it. But folded inside, wrapped in a single sentence that names no names, is her mother's brooch. Silver, shaped like a running fish, the Tully trout. Unmistakable to anyone who has sat at a table with Lady Catelyn Stark, which Lord Wyman Manderley has done more times than Sansa can count. She waits. She is very good at waiting now. She sits in the Harborside Inn, where Calla has taken 2 rooms, and she drinks warm broth that tastes of nothing, and she watches the door. The response arrives before midday. A single line, written in a broad and slightly trembling hand. Come at dusk, through the postern gate. Ask for the steward Sir Desmond. Tell him only that you are a friend of the silver fish. Sansa reads it twice. She folds it. She holds it over the candle on the table and watches it catch and curl and blacken into nothing, because this too she has learned. Paper is a liability, and the only safe secret is an ash. Dusk comes slowly in the north, even in summer, the light thinning by degrees until the sky is the color of pewter and the city's torches begin to bloom along the walls. Sansa moves through the streets with her hood up and her hands loose at her sides, moving neither quickly nor slowly. Another thing her mother said, that urgency draws the eye, that the safest pace is the one that looks purposeful but not frightened. The postern gate is where the letter described it. Sir Desmond is a man of middle years with a soldier's economy of expression and eyes that assess her in a single flat look and find whatever they are looking for, because he nods once and opens the gate without a word. The keep is warm inside. That surprises her. She had expected Coldstone and stark austerity, forgetting that Lord Wyman has always been, by northern standards, almost extravagant. Tapestries and candles, and the smell of something roasting somewhere deeper in the building. She is led through corridors that are mercifully empty at this hour, up a back stair, and deposited into a small room that contains, among other things, a very large man sitting in a very reinforced chair who looks up at her with eyes that are quick and sharp and almost entirely disguised behind the rolling good humor of his enormous face. Lord Wyman Manderley is old. She had not remembered him as quite this old. But the eyes are young, and the eyes are watching her the way a chess player watches a board. She takes the brooch from inside her clothing and sets it on the table between them without speaking. Something moves across his face, a tightening, a recognition. And then something else entirely, something she does not expect, which is grief, raw and genuine, spilling out from beneath the careful, jovial mask in a way that cannot be performed. He reaches forward and takes the brooch with fingers that tremble, and then Lord Wyman Manderley, one of the most powerful lords in the north, wealthy enough to buy 3 lesser kingdoms, makes no effort whatsoever to contain himself. He weeps, not quietly, not diplomatically. He weeps the way old men weep for things they cannot undo, and Sansa sits very still and lets him, because she understands without being told that this grief is real, that it is grief for her father, and that it is also a kind of answer. When he has recovered himself, he looks at her with reddened eyes and says that she should not have had to come this far alone. He says it as though it is an accusation directed at himself. Then he says something that erases every comfort the moment has offered. He says that the ravens reached him before she did. Lannister ravens. Asking every lord in the north, every lord in every region, to report any information regarding the whereabouts of Sansa Stark, daughter of the late. And he pauses on the word, and the pause itself is eloquent. The late Lord Eddard Stark, traitor to the crown. He says it very carefully. He says the reach of these birds has been thorough. He says thorough the way a careful man says dangerous. Sansa's hands are in her lap beneath the table, and she presses them flat against her thighs, and she does not let her expression change. She asks him, with a steadiness that costs her more than he will ever know, whether any of his neighbors have answered. Lord Manderley is quiet for a moment. He does not answer directly. He says instead that some men in the north have longer memories than others, and that memory is a complicated thing when it comes to the Lannisters and gold. He says he cannot speak for every lord between the wall and the neck. He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. She becomes Alice Rivers before the week is out. The name is Lord Manderley's invention, and it is a good one. Common enough to pass without scrutiny. Riverlander enough to explain any strangeness in her manner or her speech, and distant enough in the web of Manderley kinship that no one in White Harbor would think to verify it against a family register. She is a niece, they will say, from a branch of the family that settled in the Riverlands 2 generations past, come north for her health, for the sea air, for the quiet of a great house after the disruptions of war, beginning to curl its fingers across the southern lands. It is a thin story in the way that all useful stories are thin, built to carry weight without inviting examination. She rehearses it in the mornings, alone in the chamber they have given her, sitting before a polished copper mirror and saying the words in a low, even voice until they stop feeling like lies and start feeling like memory. Her name is Alice Rivers. Her father was a merchant factor who dealt in shill. Her mother died when she was young. She has a younger brother she's not seen in 2 years. She says these things until they settle into the spaces behind her eyes, until she can call them up without thinking. The way she once called up the names of noble houses and their words and their histories, drilling herself on the things her septa told her a lady must know. She was good at that kind of preparation then. She finds she is still good at it now, perhaps better. The stakes have a way of sharpening the mind. The new clothes help, not because they are fine. They are not by the standards she was raised to, but because they are plain in a way that changes how she moves through space. A merchant's niece does not carry herself like a lord's daughter, and Sansa works at the difference the way she once worked at needlework, with patience and deliberate repetition, softening the line of her spine, lowering her chin just slightly, learning the particular quality of stillness that belongs to someone who has no particular reason to be noticed. She is not always successful. Lord Manderley's maester watches her sometimes with eyes that see more than he says, and his housekeeper, a sharp-faced woman named Bethlyn, who has served the Manderleys for 30 years, treats her with a deference so carefully concealed it might as well be a curtsy. It is Maester Vane who tells her about Robb. He comes to her chamber on the third morning with a cup of warm broth and the practiced bedside manner of a man who has delivered difficult news before. He does not treat her as though she is fragile, and she is grateful for that. He sits across from her at the small table by the window, and he tells her, plainly, that the young wolf has called his banners, that the lords of the north answered, that Robb Stark marched south from Winterfell with an army at his back, and that her mother, rode with him, drove to him from the Eyrie when the news of Ned's capture broke. He says that by last report, the Stark forces had crossed the neck. He says it the way soldiers talk, with numbers and positions, and she listens to the numbers and the positions and holds them inside her chest where they burn like coals. Robb, her brother, who used to race her through the Winterfell godswood when they were small, who pulled her hair and apologized for it with a solemn gravity only a boy of 8 can manage. Robb, who is now a general, who has her mother beside him, who is marching toward the same Lannisters who killed their father, and who are even now sending ravens north with her name in them. She feels something enormous move through her, and she lets it pass, and she does not cry, not while Maester Vane is watching. She asks him, with Alice Rivers's voice, whether there is any word of the army's movements in detail. He looks at her for a long moment. He tells her what he knows. She listens very carefully. She begins to understand in the days that follow that listening is itself a form of power. Not the shining surface power she had glimpsed in King's Landing, not the theater of court, the declarations and the ceremonies, but something quieter and harder. The power of knowing more than the person across from you assumes you know. Lord Manderley holds small councils in his great hall most afternoons, informal gatherings of his household knights and his senior men who have served the port city through harvests and through shortages and through the minor crises that attend any large holding. She is present for some of these in her capacity as a recuperating niece with nowhere pressing to be, and she sits to one side with her mending and she listens. She listens to the way men speak when they believe they are speaking only to each other. She listens to the tensions between Manderley's captain of guards and his harbor master, to the question of grain stores and the uncertainty about which road south would remain passable through winter. She listens to the names that come up again and again, houses she knows by rote, lords she has never met, but can now begin to locate in a living map of alliances and grievances rather than a page in a book. It is during one of these sessions, near the end of her first full week inside the Manderley manse, that she hears a name that makes the needle stop in her hand. One of the knights, a broad man named Sir Edwin Crane, who speaks too loudly and thinks too slowly, mentions that a rider came that morning from the harbor road, that the rider bore a seal. That the seal, he says, lowering his voice in the way men do, when they mean the opposite of discretion, belonged to Lord Wyman's third cousin, who holds land not 2 days' ride from the Dreadfort. The Dreadfort, the seat of House Bolton. She does not look up from her mending. She keeps her expression the careful, mild expression of Alice Rivers, who has no reason to know what the Dreadfort means, who has no reason to feel the cold that word deposits in the base of her spine. But her eyes move, just slightly, to Lord Manderley, who sits at the head of his table with his great hands folded before him and his small eyes very still. He has heard the same name. He is thinking the same thought. She can see it in the way he does not react. The deliberate and practiced way that a man who has survived many years of politics does not react to the things that matter most. The writer's message, Sir Edwin continues, is that the cousin requests a meeting, private, at a location to be agreed upon. The reason given is trade concerns. Lord Manderley says nothing for a long moment. Then he says that trade concerns are always worth discussing. He says it pleasantly. He says it the way a man says something that means something else entirely. Sansa sets her mending in her lap and does not look up and does not look at him and does not let herself think too loudly, because she has learned in this past week that some rooms have walls that hear. The spice merchant arrives 3 days later. He is not remarkable. That is the point of him. A stout man with ink-stained fingers and a cart full of saffron and dried pepper and small paper parcels that smell of the South. He passes through White Harbor's gates with a dozen others of his kind, pays his toll without argument, and takes a room at an inn near the harbor where merchants have taken rooms for 100 years. He eats his supper. He drinks his ale. He does nothing that any eye would pause upon. The letter reaches Sansa before she has finished her morning bread. It comes folded inside a cloth packet of dried lavender, slipped beneath her chamber door sometime in the blue hour before full dawn, and she finds it when she rises and stands for a moment with it in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the particular and deliberate weight of something that was never meant to be found by anyone except her. There is no seal. There is no name. There's a series of phrases arranged like a merchant's inventory, listing amounts and goods and dates of shipment, and she would not have understood a word of it 6 months ago. But she is not who she was 6 months ago. She sits at the edge of her bed and she reads it twice, slowly, and then she reads it a third time, and by the third time, her hands are very still. The message is clear enough once you know how to look at it. 2 men are coming. They have already been sent. They travel as wool traders with appropriate papers and a cart, and the easy manner of men who have made this journey before, because perhaps they have. Perhaps they are exactly what they appear to be in every detail, except the detail that matters, which is that they carry Lannister gold and Lannister instructions and a list with one name on it. They will arrive, the letter tells her, within the week. What they intend upon arrival depends entirely on what they find. The letter also contains something else, a suggestion written in the same coded inventory language, dry and precise, and carrying beneath its dryness the unmistakable logic of a mind that has thought 3 moves further than anyone else in the room. The suggestion is this: hiding is a strategy with a ceiling. A girl who hides can be found. A girl who hides can be removed, and the removal explained away as anything: illness, misadventure, the unfortunate hazards of northern travel. But a girl who stands in open alignment with a cause, a girl whose name has been formally attached to a banner and a brother and a war being fought in full sight of every lord and maester in the realm. That girl is not a loose thread. That girl is a political consequence. To touch her is to declare something, and men who prefer to work quietly do not like to declare things. She burns the letter. She watches the paper curl and blacken in the candle flame, and she thinks about the mind that wrote it, the particular quality of intelligence that can be both everywhere and nowhere at once, that can send a warning north through a spice merchant's saffron while simultaneously serving wine at the small council table. She does not know what Varys wants. She has learned enough to know that not knowing is simply the condition of dealing with him. What she knows is that he sent the warning. He did not have to. That means something, even if she cannot yet name what. Lord Manderley reads the message she has transcribed from memory. She does not tell him about the burning, but she thinks he understands. And he sits with it for a long time in the gray morning light of his solar, his broad fingers pressed flat against the table's surface. When he looks up, there is nothing alarmed in his face. There is something that might be satisfaction, the quiet satisfaction of a man who suspected a thing and has now been shown that he was right to suspect it. He sends men to the gate before the hour is out. The wool traders arrive 2 days later, which is faster than the letter suggested, and Manderley's men are waiting for them with a particular politeness that is more frightening than open hostility. The traders are escorted, graciously, without incident, with every courtesy extended, to a set of rooms in a part of the castle from which they will not be leaving soon. Their cart is inspected. Their papers are reviewed with great thoroughness. It is explained to them, pleasantly, that there are certain irregularities that require clarification before they can continue their journey. These things take time. Lord Manderley apologizes for any inconvenience. He does not look particularly sorry. That evening, sitting in the great hall, while the fires settle into coals and the household thins toward sleep, Sansa thinks about what the letter asked her to consider. Legitimacy, not shelter, not shadow. The argument is simple, and it is merciless. Robb is in the field, and he is calling himself king in the north. And whether he wins or loses, the name Stark still means something in these lands. Her name means something. It has always meant something. The question is whether she is willing to let it mean something openly, in full sight, in the way that cannot be taken back. Manderley sets a cup of wine in front of her without a word. She wraps both hands around it and stares at the fire and feels, beneath the warmth of the hall and the weight of the decision taking shape in her chest, the faint and distant certainty that the two men sitting in their rooms below the castle are only the first ones. Others will come, more will come, and the only real question is who she intends to be when they do. She composes the letter over 3 days, not because the words are difficult to find. She has known what she wants to say since the morning after Manderley's proposal settled into her like cold water. But because a letter of this kind demands more than words, it demands architecture. It demands that every sentence carry its weight, and no sentence carry more than it should, and that the whole of it, read quickly by firelight in a military camp, with maps spread across the table and the sounds of an army moving outside the tent, lands with the precise weight she intends. Not desperation, not supplication. Something closer to a report from an officer in the field who has assessed her position and has intelligence to share. She writes it in their cipher. That is the detail she decides on first, before she chooses a single word of the content, because the cipher is the message within the message. It is the thing that will reach Robb before he has finished reading the first line. They invented it together as children in the Godswood at Winterfell, a simple substitution system built on the names of their dogs and the number of steps between the heart tree and the outer wall. Useless as actual cryptography, she understands now. Laughably easy to break if you knew what to look for, but beautiful in its specific weight of memory. When Robb sees those substitutions moving through her sentences, he will not think about troop positions or political leverage. He will think about the gods would. He will think about her in a wool dress with mud on her boots, laughing at something Jon said. He will know she is real, and he will know she is herself. That is what she needs him to know first. The rest of the letter is careful and clear. She is in White Harbor. She is under Manderley's protection, and she trusts that protection, though she gives him her own assessment of it, rather than simply accepting his hospitality at face value. She notes the household's loyalty, the size of the garrison, the deference shown to her in formal settings versus informal ones, the way Manderley's sons look at her when they think she is not looking. She describes the men who came asking after her, the Lannister reach extending northward along old trade roads disguised as merchant interest. She tells Robb what she has been offered, and she does not tell him what she has decided, because she is not yet asking for his permission. She is asking for his counsel. There is a difference, and she makes certain the letter understands that difference, even if it does not state it plainly. She gives it to one of Manderley's riders, a quiet man, compact and fast, who rides without banners and knows 3 different roads south. And she watches him go from a window high in the merman's court, and then she waits. The fortnight that follows is not empty. She fills it deliberately, because empty time has a way of becoming dangerous time, the kind that pools in corners and breeds the particular anxiety that looks like patience, but is not. She walks the city when Manderley permits it, accompanied but not visibly guarded, learning the harbor the way she once learned Winterfell's layout as a child, methodically, with attention to what connects to what and where the exits are. She sits in on 2 of Manderley's household meetings, saying nothing, watching how he manages men who want things. She reads. She asks for books on Northern history and trade law, and she reads them with the same attention she once gave to Septa Mordane's lessons, which is to say the attention of someone who understands that knowledge given freely is always knowledge that cost someone something. She is in the solar when the rider returns. Manderley brings the letter to her himself and leaves her alone to read it, which is either a gesture of profound respect or a calculated one. She suspects both can be true simultaneously. She breaks the seal, Robb's seal, the direwolf pressed into gray wax, and the sight of it does something behind her sternum that she breathes through carefully. And she reads, "He is alive." She knew that already in the abstract, through reports and rumors and the distant sound of what armies in motion do to news. But the letter makes it real in the way only his handwriting can, slightly uneven, always rushing forward. He is overjoyed. He does not use that word. Robb rarely uses the words for his feelings. He tends to move around them like a man navigating ice. But it is there in the way the sentence about her survival runs long and then stops abruptly, as if he caught himself. He orders her to remain in White Harbor. He tells her what her escape means. That is the part she reads twice. Her survival, he writes, is proof, not symbol. Proof. The Lannisters held her. The Lannisters are still looking for her. There are lords in the south and west, and in the uncertain middle of the continent, whose allegiance has not yet fully committed. Men who want a reason to believe the crown in King's Landing is corrupt rather than merely victorious. And a Stark girl who escaped their grasp and is living under northern protection is a reason they can touch and name and repeat at their own tables. He will use this. He tells her so without apology. She does not feel used. She feels, for the first time since King's Landing, like a piece that has been placed correctly on the board. The second letter arrives that same evening. It is her mother's handwriting, and she knows it before she breaks the seal, knows it by the pressure of the pen and the particular slant of the letters that always curved slightly leftward, a habit her mother had never lost from childhood. Catelyn Stark's letter is not a political document. It is longer than Robb's, and it says less about strategy and more about the particular things a mother reaches for when relief comes after a very long time of refusing to hope too openly. There is an instruction about warm layers. There is a specific endorsement of Manderly that reads less like tactical assessment and more like a woman reassuring herself that her daughter is in decent hands. There is a sentence near the middle that Sansa has to set down for a moment before she can continue. A Stark woman's strength has always been in endurance, her mother writes. Not in brilliance, not in bravery, though we have had both, but in the simple and difficult capacity to remain, to be still when everything moves, to be whole when everything breaks around us. You have done this already. You are already doing it. Sansa reads the rest of the letter by the window, the harbor dark below her, the lamps just beginning to be lit along the docks. She folds it twice when she is finished and holds it in both hands and looks at the water and thinks about what it means to be told that the thing you have been surviving is, in fact, a form of strength. She has thought of herself, in quiet moments, as someone who has been carried by events, as someone waiting to become the thing she is supposed to be. The letter suggests otherwise. She is still sitting at the window when a knock comes at the door. One of Manderly's stewards, apologetic, eyes careful. "There is a visitor," he says. "Arrived at the sea gate an hour ago. Not the two men already lodged below the castle. Someone new." He hands her a folded name card, plain white, no sigil. She opens it, reads the name written there in a clean, unfamiliar hand. Reads it again. She looks up at the steward, and whatever he sees in her expression makes him straighten slightly, waiting. She does not sleep that night, not because the visitor unsettles her, or not only because of that, but because the mind, once it has learned to work, does not easily stop. She lies in the dark with the name card on the small table beside her bed and thinks about White Harbor, about the letters she has written, about the walls of the room behind Lord Manderly's solar, where she has spent the last several weeks learning in silence what war actually costs. It had begun quietly, as most useful things do. Manderly had not offered her a seat at the table. No one would have allowed that, and she had not asked for it. What he had offered instead was a door left slightly ajar, a chair placed with care in the adjoining room, a steward who would bring her water without being asked and pretend not to notice she was there. Robb had sent word approving the arrangement in language so careful it said almost nothing at all, which was itself a kind of message. He trusted Manderly's judgment. He trusted her not to cause a problem. These were not small things. The lords came and went through White Harbor in a steady current, some bound for Robb's camp, some returning, some simply passing through on business that had nothing to do with the war, and yet could not be fully separated from it, because nothing could be fully separated from it now. She listened to them argue about grain stores and road conditions, about the cost of feeding an army through a winter that everyone agreed was coming and no one agreed on how to measure. She listened to a lord from a house she barely remembered explain, in exhaustive detail, why his men could not march before a particular feast day. and she listened to Manderley dismantle that argument so gently, the man left believing he had made the decision himself. She began to understand that persuasion and instruction were not the same thing. She began to understand that the most effective words were often the ones that left the other person nowhere to go but forward. The letters had come out of this understanding. She had not asked permission, which was itself a small act of decision. She had sat down with parchment and ink in the early morning, when the harbor was still gray and the gulls had not yet started, and she had written to women, wives, mothers, the people who kept accounts while their husbands kept armies, who knew exactly how many bushels remained in the granary and exactly how many sons could be spared. She wrote to them in the language her mother had taught her, warm, careful, shaped to the specific grief of each household, mentioning by name the things she knew about their families, their histories, their ties to the North that ran deeper than politics. She did not ask them to send men. She wrote about her own father. She wrote about what it meant to be a daughter of the North. She wrote about Robb and what she believed he was fighting for, in terms that had nothing to do with crowns or titles, and everything to do with the particular kind of cold loyalty that the North understood in its bones. Several households that had been sitting still began to move. She would not know for certain which letters had turned which minds, but Manderley's master knew, and he had told her quietly, without ceremony, that her correspondence had been noticed. She is thinking about this when the news of Winterfell arrives. It does not come as a formal dispatch. It comes the way bad news always comes, which is sideways. A merchant captain who had put into White Harbor ahead of weather, carrying word from a man who had heard it from another man, the chain of transmission already frayed by the time it reaches Manderley's hall. But the core of it holds. Theon Greyjoy, the gates, Winterfell taken. She is in the solar when she hears it, not behind the door this time. She had been reviewing the correspondence ledger at Manderley's invitation, a small but deliberate escalation of what she was being permitted to do. There are 3 lords present when the captain's report is relayed, and she understands in the space between one breath and the next that all 3 of them are watching her, not unkindly, but watching, waiting to see what Sansa Stark does when she is told her home is gone. She keeps her face still. She does not manage it perfectly. There is a moment, just a moment, when something moves behind her eyes that she cannot fully contain. But she holds her hands flat on the table, and she nods once, and she says that Robb must be told immediately, and that the messenger chain should be verified before any of it is committed to official correspondence. The lords look at one another. Manderley watches her with something that is not quite pride and not quite grief, and is perhaps both at once. Later, alone, she allows herself to feel it. She sits in her room with her hands in her lap and thinks about the great hall and the god's wood and the sound the gates made, the weight of the stone, the smell of the kitchens in winter. She thinks about Bran. She thinks about her father's voice echoing off the walls. Then she stops. Not because the grief is finished, because there is still the matter of the name card on the table and the visitor who arrived at the sea gate, and the question she has not yet been able to answer, whether the hand that wrote that name is a hand she can afford to trust. She picks up the card again, reads it once more in the lamplight. Then she calls for the steward. The envoy arrives at the sea gate before first light, which is itself a kind of statement. Men who come at dawn come with the assumption that their arrival is the most important event of the day, that the world will rearrange itself around the timing of their horses and the quality of their seals. This one carries the lion, gold on crimson, pressed deep into wax that has not yet cooled from the journey. And he carries himself the way all Lannister men carry themselves, as though gravity itself is a courtesy extended to them rather than a force they obey. His name is Sir Davin Price, a lesser knight of no particular consequence, which is itself significant. The Lannisters have not sent a lord. They have sent a functionary, a man whose rank says plainly, "We do not consider this a negotiation worth elevating. We consider this a collection." They have phrased their demand in the language of protection. The girl is highborn, unmarried, unguarded, and the Iron Throne in its boundless mercy wishes only to ensure her safety and proper placement within a household befitting her station. The words are soft. The threat beneath them is not. White Harbor's merchant fleet is a living thing, breathing through the ports of King's Landing and Lannisport, through the tolls and licenses that the Crown controls absolutely. One stroke of a pen. That is all it would take. One stroke, and 100 ships have nowhere to go. Manderley receives the envoy in his great hall with the full weight of ceremony. The banners hang. The household stands assembled. The lords who have been riding in from the outlying estates are present, which may seem coincidental and is absolutely not. Manderley is a man who understands that theater is politics and politics is theater, and that the difference between the two is only ever a matter of stakes. He listens to Sir Davin Price read the formal demand. He listens without expression, without movement, with the particular stillness of a very large man who has learned that stillness itself is a weapon. Then he asks, in a voice that carries to every corner of the hall, whether the envoy would like to clarify which ward of the Iron Throne is being requested, and by what name. Sir Davin Price says the name, Sansa Stark. The hall does not move. It does not breathe. And then Sansa steps forward from the far side of the room, where she has been standing in plain sight for the duration of the reading, and the hall breathes after all. She has thought about this moment. She has thought about it the way a general thinks about ground, what it gives, what it costs, what it cannot be taken back once surrendered, Varys told her, in the slow, careful syllables of a man who measures every word against its consequence, that a name can be a shield or a blade depending on who holds it first. She has held this thought for weeks. She holds it now. She walks to the center of the hall, and she stands before the envoy, and she says, clearly and without trembling, that she is Sansa Stark of Winterfell, daughter of Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, who was murdered on the steps of the Great Sept of Baelor by a king who has no right to the throne he sits upon. The hall does not move again, but this time the stillness is a different kind. Sir Davin Price opens his mouth. He does not finish the thought he begins. There is nothing in his instructions for this. For the girl to be present, to be standing, to be speaking, to be accusing. He was sent to collect a ward. He has walked into something else entirely, and the walls of this hall are full of northern men who are watching him with expressions that have no warmth in them whatsoever. Manderley speaks before the envoy can recover. He says that the Iron Throne is welcome to lodge its concern in writing. He says that a formal response will be prepared and dispatched through the proper channels in due course. He says that Sir Davin Price will be escorted to comfortable lodging for the night and conveyed to the harbor in the morning with all appropriate courtesy, and that should he or any representative of the Crown return to White Harbor without invitation, the word courtesy will no longer apply. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. The ravens go out that same evening. Manderley has written them himself in a hand that shakes slightly with what may be age or maybe something closer to fury, and the message is the same across every copy. Sansa Stark, trueborn daughter of Eddard Stark and Catelyn Tully, is alive and present in White Harbor under the protection of House Manderley and the full sovereignty of the North. Any man who rides against her rides against the North itself. Robb's camp receives the Raven 4 days later. The lords who read it pass it from hand to hand in silence. Some of them have not seen proof until this moment that anything worth fighting for has survived the South at all. Sansa does not know yet what the Raven will do when it lands. She knows only what it felt like to stand in that hall, to say her name aloud in her father's vowels, and to feel, for the first time in months, that the name belonged to her again. She is still in the great hall when the steward finds her. He is carrying a letter. It arrived, he says, by a different route entirely. Not a raven, a rider, private, no seal. She looks at the letter. Then she looks at the steward's face. He says he does not know who sent it. She takes it from him and does not open it immediately because she has learned at some cost that the first moment after receiving an unknown letter is the last moment in which all possibilities remain open. And she has become a person who values the weight of open possibility, even when, especially when, she is afraid of what the closing of it might reveal. She opens the letter before dawn. The hall has emptied by then. The lords return to their quarters with the particular silence of men who have been given something to think about. The fire has burned low. She stands near the last of its light and reads. And what she reads does not carry a name at the bottom, only a sentence, and the sentence is this: he knows you are alive, and he is moving faster because of it. No name, no seal. The rider the steward tells her when she presses him came from the southwest, not the north. Beyond that, he cannot say. She folds the letter. She does not burn it yet. She is thinking. This is what the letter changes, and what it does not. It does not change what has already been set in motion. The hall, her name spoken aloud, the faces of northern lords recalibrating in real time. What it does is remind her that motion cuts in every direction, that every piece moved on one side of a board is visible to the other side. She has emerged from shadow. Shadow was protective. She understood this when she chose to step out of it, and she chose anyway, because some things require the sacrifice of safety to become real. But understanding a cost in the abstract and receiving a letter in the hour before dawn are two different experiences, and she sits with the difference for a long moment before she sets it aside and begins to think practically. What the letter tells her, stripped of its menace, is that her survival has already reached ears that were listening for it, which means it has also reached Robb. It is not until 3 days later that the Raven from Robb Stark arrives, and when it does, the message is brief in the way that only deeply felt things can afford to be brief. He writes that he had not permitted himself to believe it. He writes that the men around him heard the news and stood differently. He does not write that he wept, but she reads between the careful lines of a king writing to a sister he thought the South had swallowed, and she knows. What Robb's renewed certainty does to the political architecture of the Northern War effort is difficult to overstate, and it begins with the Frys. The trouble with the Frys, in the months before Sansa's emergence, had been a trouble of perception as much as policy. Walder Frey was a man who measured loyalty by necessity, who understood that men in desperate positions make promises they later resent and alliances they later regret. He had watched Robb Stark's position carefully. He had done the calculations. A king without a clear succession, fighting a war on lengthening supply lines, dependent on an alliance he had entered by breaking an oath. That was a king who might need the phrase more than the phrase needed him. The leverage was implicit. The renegotiation was merely a matter of timing. Sansa's survival closes that window, not because she eliminates Frey leverage entirely, but because she changes the underlying calculation. Robb Stark is no longer a man whose house ends with his death. There is a Stark who survived the South, who walked out of the lion's den, who stood in a northern hall and said her name, and meant it. The North has something to rally to. The North has a future. And Walder Frey, whatever his appetites, is a man who has lived long enough to know when the tide has shifted beneath his feet. He renegotiates. The terms that emerge are not generous to him, and he understands this, and he accepts them with the careful grace of a man storing the memory of acceptance for some later accounting. But he accepts them. Robb holds the alliance. He does not need to break himself to hold it. With the Frey passage secured and the northern supply line stabilized, what happens in the Riverlands over the following weeks is the thing that men will debate for years afterward. Whether it was inevitable, whether it was genius, whether it required everything that came before it to become possible. The Lannister position in the Riverlands had always been strong, but never unassailable. It relied on the assumption that Robb's coalition was fracturing. That time was the Lannisters' ally, that they only needed to hold long enough for Northern unity to collapse under its own weight. Northern unity does not collapse. Robb moves. He moves with the particular decisiveness of a commander who has been given back something he thought lost, who no longer fights with one hand pressed against the wound of uncertainty. The Lannister flanks, stretched thin across contested Riverlands terrain, encounter a northern force that is not a force waiting to negotiate its way out of a war, but a force that believes it can win one. The first engagement comes near a river crossing 2 days' ride east of Harrenhal. The second comes on a ridge road where Lannister cavalry cannot deploy at width. By the third, the Lannister commanders have begun sending ravens back toward the capital, and the ravens carry a word that has not appeared in their correspondence in some time. The word is retreat. Harrenhal looms to the west, vast and broken and ancient, its towers visible from 30 miles on a clear morning. Robb is 30 miles away on exactly such a morning, and he stands at the edge of a rise with his commanders around him and looks at it and says nothing for a long time. Then he asks where his sister is. She is 3 days north of White Harbor when the road begins to tell its story. The Manderly escort rides in tight formation around her, 40 men in sea green cloaks with the white merman sigil bright against the gray morning, and Sansa watches the land from horseback with eyes that have learned over 2 years of careful attention to read what landscapes mean rather than only what they look like. The fields here were burned. Not recently. The char is old. The earth has begun its slow work of recovery, pale green threading up through black soil where crops once stood, but burned deliberately, stripped to deny an advancing enemy easy supply. She does not know whether it was iron-born hands or northern ones that put the torch to it. She suspects it does not matter to the people who planted those fields. The villages they pass through are quiet in the particular way of places that have learned quiet as a survival strategy. Children watch from doorways. Women carry water without looking up. Men working to repair fencing or patch thatching pause just long enough to take measure of the riders and then return to their work, which is the work of rebuilding something that was broken before they finished building it the first time. Sansa nods to them as she passes. Some nod back. A few do not. She has thought, in the years since she left King's Landing, about what it means to rule. She thought about it in abstractions first, the way she was taught, the obligations of a great house, the dignities owed to bannermen, the careful management of marriages and alliances like gardens requiring constant tending. She thinks about it differently now. She thinks about burned fields. She thinks about children in doorways. She thinks about the distance between the calculations made in Castle Solars and the consequences absorbed by people who had no part in making them. Lord Manderley rides at her left. He is a vast and careful man, Wyman Manderley, with a mind like a counting house. Everything entered, nothing forgotten, interest compounding quietly in the background of every conversation. He has not pressed her with questions on the road. He understands, she thinks, that she is reading, that she is doing the necessary work of understanding what she is riding back into. How long has it been like this? She says, and it is not quite a question. The worst of it came 18 months ago. Manderley answers. The Ironborn held the neck long enough to interrupt supply lines running south. What they did not take, the armies moving through took by necessity. Armies eat, my lady, regardless of whose army they are. She knows this. She knows it the way she knows a great many things now, not from instruction, but from the patient accumulation of evidence that no one intended her to collect. The road north narrows as they approach the neck, and the green of the riverlands gives way to something older and wilder, the land flattening and darkening, the trees thickening along the verge. Moat Caline rises from the marsh, ahead of them like something the earth itself built in a bad mood. Ancient, asymmetrical, more ruin than fortress, but commanding all the same. Its broken towers still tall enough to make a point. The Northern Army is camped on the far side of the causeway. She can see the banners from a mile out. The gray direwolf. Other banners she recognizes, and some she does not. Thousands of men, thousands of cook fires, the low sound of a camp that has been standing long enough to develop its own rhythms. She does not let herself think about what she will say. She has found that thinking too carefully about such moments tends to hollow them out. She straightens in the saddle instead and rides. The camp knows she is coming before she reaches it. The word moves ahead of her the way words do in armies, person to person, section to section. And by the time she crosses onto the causeway proper, men have stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. She keeps her eyes forward. She keeps her back straight. She is her father's daughter. She always was, even when she was being made to forget it. He is waiting at the far end of the causeway. Robb Stark is taller than she remembered. Or perhaps it is only that he is standing differently now, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned not to spend himself on unnecessary movement. He has their father's coloring, and their mother's jaw, and an expression that she cannot quite name from this distance, but which resolves as she draws closer into something she recognizes because she has felt it herself. The particular relief of a person who has been afraid of something for so long that the ending of the fear arrives not as joy, but as a slow release of breath. He has been afraid she was dead. He has carried that fear for 2 years. She dismounts before the escort can assist her. She walks the last 20 yards. The Northern Lords are watching. The soldiers are watching. The banners move overhead in a cold wind coming down from the north, the direwolf turning slow in the gray morning air. She stops in front of her brother. He looks at her. She looks at him. "You look older," he says. "You look tired," she says. Neither of them moves for a moment. Then Robb Stark, king in the north, lord of Winterfell, closes the distance between them, and the armies of the north watch their king hold his sister like he is the one who needed rescuing. The lords begin, one by one, to kneel. The peace does not come easily, and it does not come quickly. And when it comes at last, it carries with it the particular exhaustion of things that have been fought for so long that the fighting has begun to feel like the natural condition of the world. The negotiations drag through the turning of a season, through the slow death of summer's last warmth and the first biting clarity of a northern autumn, through rooms full of men who speak carefully and mean something different from every word they say. Sansa sits in those rooms. She has learned by now the distance between what is spoken and what is meant, and she holds that knowledge quietly, the way she holds everything she learned in the years of her exile, close and without display, and with an awareness of exactly how much it cost her. The Lannisters accept the terms because they must, because the war has bled every house that fought it, because the Iron Throne sits on a foundation that has been cracked by years of conflict, because the men who might once have refused any accommodation with the North have run out of the resources required for refusal. The North is recognized as an independent kingdom. It is written and sealed and witnessed by enough lords that the unwinding of it would require a war that no one currently living has the appetite to begin. Robb signs the document with steady hands. Catelyn stands beside him. Sansa stands on his other side, and when it is done, she allows herself one quiet breath, deep and slow, before returning her face to the careful neutrality that has served her so well in rooms full of men who mistake stillness for emptiness. She is named Lady of Winterfell. Before the march home begins, Robb announces it to the assembled northern lords in terms that are clear and unambiguous, framing her role in the language of counsel and diplomacy, of southern knowledge and hard-earned understanding, and the lords listen with the particular attentiveness of men who have watched a girl return from the south as something they are still working to categorize. They know she survived. They know she navigated courts that would have consumed most of them. They do not yet know precisely what to make of that, but they know enough to be respectful of it, and for now that is sufficient. The rest will come with time, and Sansa has learned patience the way some people learn a language, through immersion, through necessity, through the gradual discovery that it is simply the native tongue of the world she inhabits. The journey north feels nothing like any journey she has taken before. The roads are familiar in their shape, but altered by season and time, and the particular quality of attention she brings to them now. She watches the landscape shift as they travel, the rolling hills giving way to older, harder country, the trees growing denser and darker, the sky opening into that wide northern gray that she had carried in her memory through every bright and terrible southern day. Arya rides beside her for long stretches, and they speak sometimes and fall silent other times. And both the speaking and the silence have a quality of ease that would have seemed impossible to the girls they were before the war took them in different directions. Winterfell stands rebuilt. It is not precisely as she remembers it, because memory softens everything, and stone is stone. But it is close enough that the sight of it from the road stops the breath in her chest for a moment. The towers rising against the sky, the walls solid and gray and permanent in the way that only very old things can be permanent. She rides through the gates with her family around her, and the cold air of home filling her lungs with every breath. And she does not cry, because she has cried at things before that were not this, and she wants to keep this feeling distinct from all of those. That evening, when the great hall has quieted and the fires have settled into long red embers, she walks alone to the godswood. The path is exactly as she remembers. The trees press close, and the light falls differently here, filtered through branches that have been growing for centuries, and the air carries the particular stillness of a place that has never been entirely tamed by human presence. She walks until she reaches the heart tree, and she stands before it for a long moment, looking at the pale bark and the carved face that has watched over this place since before any Stark whose name she knows. She kneels on the soft ground, and she places her palm against the rough bark, and she begins, quietly, to account for everything. Not in words that anyone would hear, not in the formal language of courts and negotiations. Something quieter than that. A private reckoning with the girl she had been in King's Landing, the frightened creature who had learned to perform happiness for men who wished her harm, the young woman who had carried her family's name through places that wanted to extinguish it. She thinks of the lessons she did not ask for and could not refuse. She thinks of the silences she'd learned to fill and the silences she learned to keep. She thinks of every road that brought her here, to this ground, to this bark cool and solid beneath her hand. The godswood does not answer. It never does, in any way that can be reported or proven or recorded in the histories that will eventually be written about these years. But in its deep and ancient silence, in the breathing dark of that sacred place, something in Sansa Stark settles. Not the settling of resignation, and not the settling of defeat. The settling of a foundation finding bedrock at last. The quiet, solid, unhurried weight of a person who has traveled a very long way and arrived, finally, precisely where she was always meant to stand. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.